I've not really been so much of a fan of the new hammer. A lot of just what has been spewed out as of late, because it doesn't have that Warhammer touch, which is that the galaxy is so big that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what happens or what you do, and that's a wonderful theme of this book. Is it this one, Dave Ascension? It just shoots low, aims high, shoots low, shoots low, aims high. The body of Fabricator General Berzulam, Lord of Molred, was like a great bronze bell, clad in red and gold. His bald head, set in a writhing nest of segmented cables, without any obvious neck, projected from the shadow of its upper slopes, most often pitched downwards so as to properly condescend towards his kneeling inferiors. When he walked, it was with a swaying gait, as though there should be the toll of a clapper with each step. It was a disquietingly fluid movement from a man who had long ago done away with human feet. The dozen articulated limbs that carried him along should skitter, Gamut Triskelion thought strongly felt, rather than let such a great weight of metal drift and eddy like a denizen of a sunless alien seafloor. Right now, the Fabricator General was at rest, which for him did not mean sitting. The metal shell of his body lacking any manner of waste. Instead, Berzulam crouched on a dais, canted to observe the supplicants below, with regard to benign or otherwise, as the mood took him. At one shoulder, or at least the juncture where cyborg arms projected from his body, was Fabricator Locum Aloysia, his constant sycophant. She was a stiletto of a woman, all sharp edges, and a coiling server's tentacles, holding rids and scrolls, and an ancient reckoning engine. Each tech priest to come forward would have his request weighed and measured on the cogs of that relic, and given a moiety of Berzulam's bounty for the coming year. And there had been some bare years for Triskelion and his fellows in the Genitor Order. Their work seldom attracted Berzulam's approbation. Error and bias, he thought, awaiting his turn. But what could he do? Outside these protocols and procedures, Triskelion had submitted his order's requests for the coming calendrical research term. A long screed of closely written proposals of expeditions, experiments, and devotional exercises, seeking that ultimate perfection where flesh and machine could more elegantly express the intent of the Omnissiah. So much that we were on the very brink of. Except Berzulam had his favorites, and Treskelion's people were not among them. The current petitioner was long-winded. Aloysia shifted on the sharp points of her metal feet. Behind her, the bulk of a Castellan robot mimicked the movement ponderously. Entirely, absolutely, and in all other ways contradicted, Berzulam cut the man off. Egregiously tedious. Marticulous, don't you think, Alloy? Monotonous to the point of sedation, Fabricator General. Aloysia made a great show of yawning, something for her engineered respiratory system had no need for. Nothing for you, Marticulous. Join the conscription pool. Go round us up some fitting offerings. A hollow chuckle rang through Berzulam's frame. Now, what do we have here? Pernoten Tan, forwards, Master Tan. And let us have your insights. Tan, a crony of Berzulam of old, had a dozen of Marad's manufactoria in his care. He wished, he said, to revisit a metallurgical technique, long fallen into disuse, but recently unearthed by his researchers. Nothing significant, Triskelion noted with disdain. Just one more pairing of knowledge, fallen on the body floor a century before, and now swept out from under the tables by a plodder like Ton. And it was mercury, of course. Ton was obsessed with mercurial alloys, no matter the toll they took on the flesh. He was reeling off his estimates now. 2% greater durability, 4% greater increase in production speed, and, buried in the figures, 11% reduction in the estimated lifespan of the manufactorum workers from contact with all that toxic metal. And that would impact productivity in a generation's time, Triskelion knew. And doubtless that was why the practice had been abandoned for the first time. We go round and round, abandoning bad ideas for someone to come along and discover them all over again. But Tan received a generous allocation of the research bursary for his bad idea, and then it was the turn of Triskelion to step forward, almost the very end of the long line, to shepherd his own proposals. He stood as tall as he could, irising his artificial eyes to steely blue dots, manually releasing a little pressure from the elbows in his chest to give his voice a steadier tone. "Oh," Borzulim said, rolling his one organic eye. "Observe, Alloy. It's our esteemed colleague and the Viserial Triskelion," a nickname that had dogged Triskelion since their common youth in the seminary. "Fabricator General." But then he was waved to silence as the servitor bustled jerkily in with news. Borzulim took the scroll from the man-shaped thing and held it back and forth, his living eye squinting and his brass counterpart telescoping in and out. "Aha!" An expression of glee that had set the man's body ringing with resonant echoes. "Our steel protégés have returned. Splendid. My learned colleagues." His voice abruptly turned to twice the volume, trying to encompass the whole room. "I am informed that we have today in orbit some proud sons and daughters of Borod, the faithful conscripts who left our shores in times past to be remade from gross flesh, and the gallant Skitarii. They who left our world to nobly quest under the light of other stars have returned to welcome those whom we send to join their cybernetic siblinghood. And we must not shame them, my learned colleagues. We must ensure that they are welcome with fireworks and ceremony, and all the precisely calculated degrees of appropriately calculated jubilation. And fresh conscripts, of course, lots and lots of conscripts. Forgive me, colleagues. This places such a burden of administration on my head." And the belframe of his body was lifted onto his many little feet, ready to drift away as though blown by the wind. Triskelion adjusted his bellows again until a sound like a cough issued from his chest. Borzulim stopped, one eye and then the other swiveling down. "Oh," he said without relish. "Oh, yes. Mustn't go before listening to old Visceral. Uncase your contents and reveal all, Visceral." Triskelion ground his teeth, but held his both patience and dignity. "Fabricator General," he said, passing his scrolls to a servitor to be ferried to Borzulim's bronze grasp. "The Genitors put forward a wide-ranging and pan-disciplinary research curriculum, primarily focused on my own work with the Skitarii. As you know, current practice on remote reconfiguration of our Skitarii in the field relies heavily on adaptation only of our mechanical components, often to the detriment of the remaining living systems, impairing function and reducing operational lifespan. I am experimenting with a filter that will grant a greater resistance and adaptability to organic tissue, thus allowing us the same degree of control and manipulation of their living substance, and therefore..." "Ugh," Borzulim interrupted. "Same old Visceral. I know your type likes to dabble in all manner of unspeakable substances, but this can only be characterized as unseemly, unsalubrious. Do you occur, Alloy? Positively infested with organic effluvia, Aloysia agreed. She had the great weight of proposals held up now, her tendrils leafing through them in a blur. And unprecedented, Fabricator General. I don't see a single seal or writ of dispensation certifying this research. Where were these techniques originally set out, Visceral? I am following a revised line of inquiry, Triskelion said carefully. You'll see that I have conducted an analysis on the gaps in research recovered, and I am attempting to reconstruct the original through novel procedures that follow a statistical best fit model. He had been shuffling forwards as she read, and now was right at the foot of the dais, looking up at them, hating himself for having to beg. But this once he needed to impress his loathsome pair of superiors. I could reach out and follow, do they? Brazulum echoed. But Triskelion, it seems to me that you haven't been following anything at all. This all sounds like that you've been making it all up. Like any layman, and his folly. Abruptly his face was all hard and stern, levity banished. If this work is the righteous labor of a tech priest, show me where it has been perfected and performed by our predecessors. Show me in the histories, O wayward genitor, where these things have been judged fit for our rights and doctrine. Because this looks to me as though you feel you can trample over things that are already done. In your haste to get to places our fairbearers never went. And if they never went, Visceral, it was for good reason. You will follow these novel inquiries of yours all the way to heresy. If it were meant for us to do these things, then these things would have been done. And most of the other tech priests echoed the litany in a droning mumble. I could just. Where the machine routines are incomplete, then only experimentation can determine what the original process might have been, Triskelion equivocally hurried. I swear before the writ of our Messiah that I shall. No, Brazulum stated. We will keep you from temptation, my wayward genitor, for you are ours to protect from your most worst impulses. A metallic snicker. No resources allocation for Gamut Triskelion and his genitors, Alloy. Note that down. Duly noted, Fabricator General. Instead, the conscription pool. After all, we mustn't shame our returning heroes. Now that the vagaries of the war have brought them back to us for our festivities, we shall have an Ascension Day fit to remember. The greatest for a century. I don't think I've forgotten you, dear. The Cyril. The conscription pool yawns for you, Triskelion. In fact, because I love and value you, you shall have the responsibility of meeting quota. Let your novel inquiries be put to the best manner of rounding up a new batch of prospective servitors and Scutari. Harvest us a good crop this Cyril, and maybe next year you might have a little booster area of your own. Fabricator General, please. And before he could stop himself, Triskelion leaned forwards, actually laid a hand on the taut fabric of Brazilian's robe. Even went so far as to tug at the man, pulling him forwards, teetering at the dais' edge. And I could cast him down. The thought was simultaneously sacrilegious and electrifying. What biased calculations placed him over me? Shift one decimal, and it would have been me there, denying him. How dare, Brazulum shrieked. Alertia, have him unhand me. The gunfire began even with his last words, a figure bursting through the assembled tech priests, scattering them like pins. Triskelion saw two hands brandishing pistols, two, and then a third. There was Scutari shouldering after, virtually clubbing the junior priests, down in their haste to get to the assassin. The first shots had torn great gouges in Brazulum's finery, leaving bright scars in the metal of his body. The next Triskelion pulled. He had a fistful of the torn robe, and he hauled on with all his strength, dragging the Fabricator General off his pedestal with a wail. Berzulim hit the ground with a Sorona's bronze peel, his many feet kicking and rattling for purchase. The guns blazed. Triskellion's world went white. He felt a moment of incandescent agony about his arm and shoulder, and then the limits he had set within his flesh killed the pain before it could overwhelm him. The internal chronologue informed him that he had lost 1.5 seconds of experienced time as his nervous system overloaded and was brought forcibly back. He was draped over the rocking, protesting form of Brazulim, or most of him was. There was an arm lying in rags and tatters, spattered in the steps of the dais. Triskellion's left arm. The salvo of pistol fire had cut it clean off his shoulder. Up on the dais, Aloysia was stock still, frozen, as though her limbs had glitched. Her Castellan robot mimicked her startled posture. No help at all. The assassin was standing over him. Triskellion's eyes, the two blue lens replacements he'd installed after one explosive lab failure too many, kept shifting focus between the three barrels. 3 hands. In the seconds before his surely impending death, he focused on ridiculous details. The toughened, horny skin of those fingers, like chitin or machinery, perfect in its articulation. He looked past the guns to the killer's face, seeing a woman's features stretched, the eyes sheer black, the mouth wide. The Skitari opened fire then, the blue-green light of their carbines crackling about the room. At least one junior tech priest was caught where he shouldn't have been and cut down in error. Must recalibrate their targeting. What thoughts to have in the last moment of one's life. But then the assassin staggers, they found her. Even though she turned and shot down 2 of them. Bullets seeking out vital battery connectors and fluid pumps. Another iridescent scatter of shots raked her, and she went down to one knee, pistols jumping from spasming hands. Berzulim bucked and jolted his rider off him. Triskelion landed hard, a searing sensation shooting through his body. Not pain, but the recollection of it, which had been locked away in those 1.5 seconds of blank memory. The assassin was snarling, hissing, pinned down by metal hands of 5 Skitari, as another leveled a rifle at a misshapen head. Hold! Berzulim actually sounded composed as Aloysia helped him to his feet. Such an unpardonable insult as this deserves more public proceedings. He didn't even sound out of breath. But then, of course, whatever was breathing for the Fabricator General was independent of whatever spoke for him. Ascension Day is upon us, after all, and along with a crop of offerings, we will need entertainment. Electric excruciation, I think, for the greater glory of the Omnissiah, and in this case, we will need to build the frame especially. The mines will keep turning out their mutations, will they not? He poked at the wounds of the assassin. She hung in the Skitari's grip. Remarkable! She has too many arms, and you, Visceral, now have too few. He looked down at Triskelion, who was exploring the ruin of his shoulder to see what could be saved. Doubtless, left to your own experiments, you would amputate one of hers and merely add it to the fragilities of your own flesh. I shall save you from the baseness of your proclivities. Go have yourself fitted with an appropriate metallurgical replacement, and then to your duties. After all, we have a momentous day planned. Go and prove you're worthy of a little responsibility. Without a backwards glance, Berzulim drifted from the room, his many little feet tapping lightly on the floor. The other priests followed after him, bowing and scraping and commending his wisdom. One of the Skitari helped Triskelion to his feet. He made an abortive movement towards the wreck of his lost arm, feeling lightheaded at the loss of blood, or at least fluids. Shock was setting in. He knew. He needed to get back to his lab, where a cocktail of biological suppressants would have him thinking clearly again. Wait! The word was out of his mouth before he knew what he'd said. The Skitari had been hauling the assassin off, rendering unconscious by her own shock and blood loss. Tech priest, make sure she lives, he got out, so she can be executed in public. Servitors had arrived to clean up the mess, and again, he wanted to reclaim his arm, one more piece of the dwindling biological material he'd been born with. Sentiment, though, and that had no place in a man of his station. He was staring at the killer's sagging features, her weirdly proportioned head. It reminded him of something he'd read about long ago. The obscure researches of priests who'd come before him. A mutant, Brazulum had said. Triskelion wasn't so sure. But by then he really did have to get back to his lab before the shock overcame his implants and took him down. And then there was the conscription pool. Mean and menial work, as it was. He stumbled off, waving away any attempt at help. He needed to think about his future.